Okay, welcome everyone. My name is Dorothy Castles. I'm the project manager of ITELab, and it's my pleasure today to welcome you to the briefing of the Module A, developed in conjunction with the partnership between industry and universities. And Dr. Conor Galvin from University College Dublin will be taking you through as the lead. This session is being recorded for people who are not able to join in person but want to see and understand how it is being taught to look at afterwards. So the link will be sent to those afterwards. And we have welcome today in terms of our partners. We've got the University of Perugia here who's teaching in secondary. So we've got Conor who's teaching in Connor's teaching in secondary, Perugia in primary, so we have the different views there. So Conor, over to yourself. Thank you. Oh,
Thank you
one
very
final
much.
thing just to mention, we use the chat line for everyone, and I'll keep my eye on that. Thank you, Conor.
Thank you very much indeed, Dorothy, and good afternoon, colleagues. Good afternoon from Dublin. It's the second time today that some of us have spoken, and it's nice to see some new names as well as some of the familiar colleagues' names in the actual attendance list. Now, this is a slightly different from the usual partner meeting in the sense that what I want to do basically is just talk a little bit about how we at UCD are actually going to run the Module A offering over the coming semester. It will be run in conjunction, obviously, with colleagues in the core partnership, but we will also be welcoming for the first time associate partners. So I'm going to ask forgiveness, please, from those of you who know me. Some of this will be a little bit repetitious in the sense that you will have heard it before, and this is to accommodate our new partners and new possible participants in the module. So without further ado, I'll just kind of move the slides along as we need them. The working title, and I suppose it's now more than working title, it's more or less confirmed at this stage. The title for the module is Teaching, Learning and Professional Development for Beginning Teachers. One change to the standard nomenclature, the standard description that we give for the modules that I'd like to draw your attention to, please. We're referring to it specifically as a module framework. Now, the reason for this is to do with what we have discovered over the two pilots this last spring and in the pilot immediately before Christmas, where a number of colleagues were able to make use of elements but not all of the module. And we want to encourage that, not because we don't want people to use the full module, but because we want to have the flexibility for colleagues to dip in and dip out, to take some elements or some aspects of the module and to work with those as opposed to taking all of it bell, book and chapter. So that's really why I've included the word framework here in the slightly altered title for the piece. Again, for colleagues who are new to ITELab, I'll make two observations. First, we focus in this project generally, not just in the modules, but right across the project, we focus on the development of digital pedagogical skills for future teachers. A lot of this connects directly with teaching and learning settings. In other words, some of our student teachers are working in schools, but equally a large number are not. And that's one of the reasons that we run the two separate lines. We call them the primary line and the secondary line, but effectively the main distinction between the two is more or less to do with connection to classrooms. The secondary line tends to assume more connection with classroom practice and the opportunities to work in classroom settings as the module or the parts of the module that we're using roll out. The primary line is more oriented, if that's the right word, towards working with student teachers, beginning teachers that do not necessarily yet have full access to classroom teaching and learning situations. So the spring pilot that we're looking at now will run from January 2019 to May 2019, starting at different points, 2 different start points. One, as I say, one line is what we call the primary line, and one line is what we call the secondary line. This is, again, colleagues who are familiar with the partnership meetings will recognize this particular slide. It's a particularly useful way of showing what we're actually doing. Now, what we're talking about here is effectively the green area, where we're looking at the co-design, the development and the piloting of materials and ideas that are to do with teaching and learning, and that we think are useful to young teachers, teachers just starting out, those who are in the final stages of their studies in terms of preparing to be teachers in full-time employment in schools across Europe, whether that is primary or secondary. So there are the 3 lines running all the time. There's the forum, which is some interesting stuff going on there. There's the design and testing line, which this module that we're talking about this afternoon fits within. And the 3rd line is to do with monitoring. It's to do with reporting and so on. We cross a little bit into that in the sense that some of the activities towards the end of the module particularly will connect with the monitoring and the evaluation process that the project generally is pushing out. So that's really where we are. We are more or less here where the blue line runs. We're about to start the piloting of modules A, B, and C. A for the 3rd time, B and C for the 1st time. So that's where we are in terms of the timing of the project. Very briefly, a little bit about the philosophy, because this is what holds us together. This is what we agreed on when we met. This is what, if you like, makes the work we're doing in ITELab a little different from the sorts of activities that people will have perhaps been involved in previously. We are focused on innovation. We are focused on pedagogy. So both of those are equally important. The innovation aspect, usually but not always, but usually connects to the use of technology and technology-enhanced teaching and learning. And that is the key note, if you like, of the approach that we take. All of the activities that we encourage student teachers to do are activity-driven. They're basically to do with trying things out, having a go at, making materials, making resources, and so on. There is an element of collaborative work that we encourage throughout the module, and in 2 specific instances, which I'll talk a little bit about later, we meet in a virtual space across the various institutions. So if there are 3 institutions or 4 institutions, we meet in what we call the live to air session to share our practice and to share what we're learning. And the final line then is to do with the deeper nature of what we're doing. The modules are frameworks. They're not Bibles or Quran or anything like that. They're meant to be taken flexibly. The materials are agile. They can be taken, they can be adapted, they can be changed, they can be fitted into existing programs quite readily, is what we've discovered. There is a primary and secondary aspect to what we do. And in some cases it crosses over very directly. For example, when we're using Skype in the classroom, there's elements of that that are relevant to both primary and secondary colleagues. There is an initial teacher education application throughout. We are interested mostly in working with later stage students in teacher education, but we're happy to connect with anybody who is involved in preparing students at any stage of the process of teacher education and teacher preparation. So that's why we use the term beginning teacher and student teacher interchangeably. And the final characteristic is we're pan-European. We have a reach that goes from Northern Europe all the way down to the south. And that, I think, has been a great strength to what we've been doing so far, because it has allowed us, when we meet, as in this particular instance here, to hear different perspectives, to see different ways that colleagues in teacher education are using technology, and to hear the voice of the industry partners in relation to their best suggestions, in relation to their recommendations and their ideas about how we can add extra value to teacher education initiatives by the clever or smart, if you like, use of technologies. So that's been a characteristic of the work throughout also, and what we have in Module A is not something that was dreamed up by somebody here in Dublin or indeed in Brussels or anywhere else. It's the product of a series of meetings and refining of documents over time that have allowed us to take ideas, test them out in real-world settings in various parts of Europe using our partners, and gradually build up the module content that we have actually got today, which I think is a pretty formidable framework in and of itself. It's flexible, it allows you to dip in and out, but there's a rigor, there's a line running through it, which I think you'll see when we look at the content spaces that hold it together, connected with its philosophy, but also with its very practical reach and approach. So the lines of activity, I did mention that we have two lines of activity running, one that we're calling the secondary framework line and one that we're calling the primary framework line. And again, I'm open to questions or comments at any stage, folks. Dorothy can step in to chair questions if necessary, but if you want to add notes in the chat line as we go, or comments or indeed questions, please feel free to do so. I will watch the chat line here as well as speaking to the slide set. So this is a very quick summary, a very simple summary, in fact, of the two lines. The secondary framework effectively begins for UCD this coming Monday, which is the 21st of January. And because of the way that holidays are unusual in Ireland, and because of the way that Easter falls this year, we have a number of short breaks. It doesn't run week 1, 2, 3, 4 seamlessly, but it does run for 11 weeks all told, including the assessment arrangements, starting on the 21st of January with the first block running to the start of March. Then there's a slight break here at UCD, but in the past what has happened is other institutions that have been involved have simply continued. You do not have to stay to the UCD timeline. If you want to drop in and drop out, that's absolutely fine. But there are one or two moments where it's ideal to have us all in the same time space, and I'll talk about those in a couple of seconds. So the final stage of the work at UCD then is from the 25th of March, after St. Patrick's Day, through to the 8th of April, allowing for an Easter break. So it's not intensive, there is a drop away. The primary framework starts a little bit later. Now, I've had a number of suggestions that it is still too early, but unfortunately we have to pick a start time someplace. So we're working with our colleagues in Perugia. We've settled particularly on the 25th of February as the start date for the primary framework line. That's when most of the institutions that have expressed an interest in being involved in the testing of materials and who have a primary focus would seem to be starting to come back into term or inter-semester. And indeed not all of them. Some of them start as late as early April. I'm aware of that. But the idea is that the materials will be there and people can drop in and drop out on a week-to-week basis from the start line. So the primary framework runs for 2 blocks, 25th of February right through the 8th of April. That's block 1. It then breaks for Easter and returns 29th of April to the 6th of May. And again, these are all at the moment provisional dates. They are not absolutely finalized, but it would be probably very unlikely that they will change at this stage. So those are our two lines. It is possible to cross between them, to drop into one and then to change to the other, but in general, the tone of the primary framework is associated with primary students and less contact with teaching and learning schools, and the secondary framework is designed on the basis that there is the possibility at least of more contact, more direct contact with schools as the module is developing. So I see Alicia has mentioned there that the dates look fine from the perspective of Perugia. I'm delighted to hear that. I hope it works also for Santarém if they decide to join us for the full run, and for any other primary or secondary colleagues who are looking at the date frame at this stage. As Dorothy has said, this is all recorded, and we will also make the slide set available for people to download afterwards if they're interested in having a copy of the slides to go with the presentation. So, can I say a little bit at this point about the framework itself? The secondary framework in terms of units and dates, and then I'll look at the primary framework subsequently. So there is not a huge difference. There is some difference, but not massive differences in terms of the content, or in terms of the focus, or in terms of the activity. There's a thread that connects them that relates to the idea of working for capability and competence. That's the same regardless of which of the framework materials you're working with. But what we have done for convenience is divide them into units that connect specifically through thematic areas. So for example, in the secondary framework, Unit 1, which runs for the first 3 weeks or so, runs from January 21st to February 4th, and the focus in that unit is on being a beginning teacher in the digital world. Now, the details of what's involved in that are in the handbook, so I'm not going to go, in depth and too deeply into it. But effectively, we have a 3-week block. Each of the suggested teaching blocks for Unit 1, Unit 2, are approximately 1.5 hours to 2 hours in length. We start and we run in the same sequence. We have an indication of how you might start the activity. We have an idea, we make suggestions about how you might develop the area, and we make very specific suggestions that colleagues can use or not in relation to resources that we have found online that help us explain and explore the particular topic we're working with on any given day. The consolidation part of the activity follows from that, and that usually involves a summary of the events that have actually happened in the session and a follow-out, if you like to call it homework or follow-through or whatever you decide to class it as, you can see it in those terms. So that particular model of the lesson runs through each of the units, whether 1, 2, whether primary or secondary. And it has worked very well in the testing so far, but we're interested, of course, as always, in refining it further. So Unit 1 for secondary framework runs from 21st of January to the 4th of February. The Unit 2 is slightly longer. That one runs from the 11th of February through to 25th of March. But do remember, please, that there's a break there because of the UCD holiday around St. Patrick's Day. And then the final unit, the first 2 units are taught, or they're involved in teaching or work or activities. The final unit connects always to the assessment and the evaluation process. So it's usually 1 week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks is what colleagues have been testing out. We have settled on a 2-week model for the secondary framework, and each of the weeks has a slightly different focus. The first is on sharing what we have learnt, and that is in one of our 2 live-to-airs, and I'll talk a little bit about those in just a brief moment. And in Unit 2, there is also a live-to-air session, which again I will speak about very briefly in a couple of moments. But the idea basically is that any part of this material can be taken and used independently of any other aspect. However, the design around the evaluation is built in such a way that it is better to do a sequence of activities connecting to Unit 1 and Unit 2 so that it flows through into the design of the evaluation process. In very simple terms, at UCD, what we do in each case is we have an activity, a homework piece at the end of each week that builds up into a portfolio that the students present as part of their assessment in Unit 3. That's the simple version. Other colleagues in different institutions have tried variations on that, and everybody has come back with some suggestions which we've tried to incorporate into the newer model. So that's the broad outline in relation to Units 1, 2 and the assessment unit for the secondary framework. Now, what is this live to air thing all about? Well, this is something that we're very keen to finalize on. We've tried variations on this. In very simple terms, what we do is we put out an invitation to all partners who are involved in a particular strand to join us online for an hour-and-a-half block on a particular day, where we share activities rather than each individual institution working on their own. We're interested in having a shared space, a little bit like the one we're in currently, and indeed we may be using Adobe as our frame. But the idea is a very simple one. It allows the students, not the teachers, not the lecturers, it allows the students in each of the locations to get together for a short space of time to talk to each other and to work together to share their learning in terms of the module and its processes. So this happens twice in each of the lines. The first part is on the 25th of February. That is to do with technology for international collaboration, and it sets up a whole block on exactly that topic, working together using technology to share experiences and to share classroom activities if you have access to classrooms. The second live to air is more to do with presenting what you have learned. And again, the focus is on the student teacher. We call it simply drawing the learning together, sharing the gains. And for those of you who are familiar with the idea of a teach meet, it's a little like an online teach meet. Now, I will be perfectly honest and say this has not worked exactly as we assumed it would so far. So we're trying a slightly different model this time around, which I'll explain closer to the day when it comes to working with the partners and the associate partners who are taking parts or all of this particular module. Okay, Dorothy, do you want me to stop at this stage and take one or two questions on the secondary framework, or will I just keep going in relation to the primary one? I'm taking that as keep going, okay? Fine. So the primary framework is similarly divided into units, but slightly differently. And this again is a slight departure from last year, because last year we worked on exactly the same units in exactly the same sequence in both lines. What we thought we would try this time is to do more or less cover all of the material, but to do it in a slightly different way. And you can see that the unit titles are different. So Unit 1 for the primary group will be described this time as Widening the Teaching and Learning World. And it starts on the 25th of February. Now, if you look back, you'll see one of the reasons why this is actually happening. The 25th of February is the first live to air session for the secondary line. What we thought we would try to do is bring the primary and the secondary colleagues together for that one session when both of them are online. It will act as a sort of an end of Unit 1 for the secondary line, and it will act as a start of Unit 1 for the primary line. I'm quite excited about this, and I think it'll work rather well. I'm hoping it will. but it will mean that the Unit 1 focus for the primary line will be slightly longer. It'll be 5 weeks rather than 3, and it will focus specifically on a lot of the content that is in Unit 2 of the secondary. But the sequence will work, I think, and it's in our primary handbook. Those of you who have got access to the primary handbook will see the green handbook as opposed to the blue one. Will see that it's more or less the same material, but just presented in a slightly different order. So Unit 1 will run for, as I say, approximately 5 weeks. It will cover a number of headings, and again, these are in the handbook. But effectively, it will look at e-twinning, it will look at Skype, it will look at Twitter and personal learning networks, and it will look at MOOCs, all within the first block. So there's a little bit more coherence, I hope, and I hope Susanna and our colleagues also in Perugia will actually find that useful. So that's all put together rather than scattered across the program as it was last year. The second unit then is an intensive 2-week unit where we look at the uses of video in 21st century teaching and learning. So it's the same content, it's the same approach. It may or may not kick off with a live seminar depending on the availability of our colleagues in Iris Connect, and I see Vesna is online at the moment. So we spoke briefly about this, Vesna, when we spoke last. That's the block 1st of April and 8th of April. If we don't have a live webcast to start it off, we will have a shared, stored and recorded version from a few weeks previously on the secondary line. And I'm interested to see which will work most effectively in this particular case. So again, Unit 1 and Unit 2 are teaching units. Unit 3 is the assessment unit. And this time round, we thought we would actually have a 3-week assessment block rather than just a 1 week. The first, where a lot of work can be done locally to round out the experiences of being involved in the project. The second week, where we share that, and the third week where we look in a very structured way at the evaluation of the learning that has actually taken place. And this is slightly new. We have not tried this before, but having spoken to our evaluation colleagues, we feel this will be a useful way to finalize and to round out the entire assessment and evaluation unit. So it will allow the students to feed directly into the evaluation process for the entire module. And we think that will be both useful and interesting for the students to do so. Then live to airs, I've mentioned again, we have live to airs within the primary strand. The first one is the shared live to air, where both lines are running together, and we look at technology for international collaboration. And the second one for the primary is also a presentation of work from within the various primary institutions, a sharing of that work. Depending on how many partners we have, it could be 3 or 4 partners sharing very briefly with each other the learning that has taken place in the form of small presentations or challenges or a conversation. Again, we will work on the format of that as the module develops. So that, if you like, is the main architecture of both the primary line and the secondary line. And as I've said, I'm very happy to take questions or comments or observations on each of that. How do we hold the whole thing together? How do we keep our students supported? How do we know what's happening and where it's happening? That's to do with the hubs. Now, we have tested and found these work quite effectively in the last semester. They're still a little bit rough, but we are working on finalizing them at this stage. The idea behind the hubs is a very simple one. It is an open space that the students or the staff involved in the delivery, the teaching of the modules can go to. When you go there, what you will find is versions of the handbook that are more up to date than the actual handbook itself. So because this is a project that grows and changes and moves, we're always making minor adjustments. And rather than have version 26 or 28 or 29 of the handbook, what we will do is we will keep on a week-to-week basis in the ITELab Staff Hub, we will keep a formal record of what is being taught in the week in the UCD setting and context. So it will effectively be UCD week 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, but that material is open to any or all of the partners to use, to take, to adapt, to change, to work with as they like. So that's the idea, if you like, of the Staff Hub, and it's at itelab.wordpress.com. There will be basic information about the modules, including updated links. So if a link, for example, is broken or changes from the handbook, the hot link in the module materials under that week on the hub will be fixed and will be functional in that regard. So we will probably add a discussion frame to this later also, but for the moment it is purely a place to go to have a look at the plans for next week and the week after. Effectively, what we put up will be the materials we're using 1 to 2 weeks in advance. So for example, by over the weekend, certainly by Monday, what will be up under Module A is the materials that will be used in their entirety. The content, the activities, the suggested links, the supporting documents that we will be using in UCD when we teach week 1 and week 2 of this particular version of Module A. Each week we will add the material for the following and the subsequent weeks. That's the idea behind the hub, the Staff Hub. So if you want to see what exactly is happening at any particular point in time, that's the place to go to get that information from a teaching perspective. We have similarly got a hub from the student perspective. Now, the student hub, again, it is very basic at the moment, but during the pilot it will grow slightly. What the hub consists of currently is what we call the challenge questions. Now, the idea behind the challenge question is a very straightforward one. As I said to you, in UCD, each week the session ends with a challenge or an activity, a suggestion about something that the students can go and do. What we ask them to do in terms of recording that is to put it up under the challenge question heading for that week on the Student Hub. So the Student Hub address is itelab.org. I will leave some of the live materials up there. If colleagues want to have a look at them to see the sort of comments we got during the last pilot, you're welcome to do so. But as this pilot goes on, this will be growing. Now, for the moment, the working language is English, but I'm open to changing that if colleagues feel they'd rather have options to do otherwise. The idea is a very simple one. If I am a student in UCD, I can go in and see, hopefully, what students in, for example, Santarém, or perhaps if Göttingen join us, students in Göttingen, or wherever, have actually put up under the challenge question for that week. So it's not just what I'm putting up myself, I'm seeing what other students are including in their answers to the challenge questions, if their institution decides to use the challenge questions. There will also be, and it's not visible at the moment, but there will also be a resource area where we will point students at ideas and further resources that are suggested to us, mostly coming from our industry partners. But indeed, in the pilot phase, we found that some very good ideas also came from the academic sections of the project. So that will also be an area on the hub that will grow as the session goes on. Now, the challenge questions, this is just an example. It's not exactly the wording we will use, but you can see the way that it's from the autumn pilot. You can get a sense of what the challenge questions look like. It's a very straightforward question with some prompts as to how the students might respond, and then a word limit. And the word limit is no more than 350 words. So in other words, you have to keep your answer short and make it interesting. And this has worked reasonably well for us in terms of the testing. So this time out, we're going to test it for the entire module. We're running from week 1 right through the 2 teaching units right up to the end of the teaching block, which is the end of unit 2. Okay. Dorothy, if I see you've put in the call for questions. I don't see any coming in yet, but I'll keep going if that's okay, just to finish up.
If I can just ask one, you've mentioned, but it might be helpful to people. Within the handbook, you've got the resources that you particularly are using and the links at UCD, and you'll put them on the hub.
Yeah.
But you also mentioned that obviously each university, if you have localized resources, then to use them, but if they could share them on the hub with us, that would be useful for growing the resource base.
Absolutely, and that would be my hope. We saw some of that happening, but not, not a whole lot of it. We did see some happening in the earlier pilots, so that was truly excellent. So that's typical of the sorts of questions, and then the answers, if you want to see examples of the answers, I will leave on the Student Hub for the moment some of the examples from the previous run of the project in the autumn. And again, we will have the resource area, and as ideas come to us, we add them. So it's not just the UCD materials, it's the materials that have been used at UCD, plus any other ideas that we get from colleagues. And I think that works reasonably well. Okay?
And sorry, one other question from me, Connor.
Yep.
You mentioned this morning, just to share wider, how you were going to use the Teacher Hub to discuss, sometimes to discuss some issues,
yeah,
or a question that you want reflection on from across the different universities, and use the hub for that.
Yeah, I don't like to call it a challenge question for the teaching staff. It sounds a bit kind of, like you must do. But I thought it would be interesting to actually use that facility also. So to put out a thematic area, to put out a question, to put out a comment, and then see what colleagues across the various institutions have got to say, in relation to that. So that's certainly another area we're interested in expanding on, and it's an idea that came to us when we were doing the review of the pilot work in the autumn, and it came, I think, specifically from the pedagogical advisory group. Our board, if you like, suggested that we might consider that. So we're happy to have a look at that. So again, Dorothy, if that's okay, I'll just push on of 2 or 3 slides left.
Certainly.
Okay. Yep. So again, this is what our philosophy looks like. To remind you, we looked at that at the very beginning. The notion of innovative pedagogy, focused, activity driven, flexible and agile, with a primary and a secondary focus. Now, that translates very directly into the assessment process that we have taken on. So in relation to the first one, what we have worked on and what has been reasonably successful, and what we hope to continue working on, is the idea of the students producing a portfolio of products or artifacts, things that they can use very easily in their own teaching and learning situations, or to support their own learning or their understanding in relation to better use of technology. The second element is to do with performance and sharing. We emphasize the sharing aspect through the collaborative, the formal collaborative side, but we also encourage students to, in various institutions, to talk to each other on sidebars. So to build a Twitter network, to build a connection through the MOOC perhaps, to build connections through activities that interest them, that they pick up from the challenge questions. Something like that will allow them to continue building their own professional networks and speak to each other accordingly. And finally, the idea that this is not UCD telling anybody what they should be doing. It is not the ITELab telling the world what it should be doing in relation to using better technologies, or using technologies more effectively. This is a series of ideas, activities, suggestions that can be localized, that anyone in any partner institution can take, use as it is, or change and use as it seems more appropriate to do so for your institution. What we have tried to do is gather a bunch of material and ideas that are teaching relevant, that we think usefully connect with teaching and learning, and that connect in a very special way with how technology can be used within teaching and learning. So that's I suppose that really is the core message I wanted to send out today. What we're doing in UCD is basically trying just about all of the materials. We will not be using one particular week because we're not in the building, but we will use just about all of the module content and activities. So we will use the entire framework. Other colleagues are welcome to use as much or as little of the framework as they choose to do. And we welcome, 2 to 3 week activities or connections just as much as we welcome a full framework or full module length connection from associate partners in particular. So that's really what I wanted to say. This is the point where I put up my comments and questions slide, and we can sort of take it from there. Dorothy.
Thank you, Connor. I was speaking into my muted mic there. Thank you very much, Connor. It's been a really useful sort of talk through of the structure and the implementation and the flexibility in that, the philosophy behind it and the benefits it gives the students, and the use of the hubs, which is really exciting. We have the usual challenge of dates, which I'll catch up separately with you on, Connor, and the times. But we now, the good news is we have 30 students, which is excellent, from the University of Perugia joining us, which is excellent.
That's fantastic. And I do note Massimo's comment there and Floriana's comment that they are choosing to run on a Tuesday. UCD module runs on a Monday in the middle of the morning. You do not have to run on a Monday in the middle of the morning. You can run whenever it suits your institution. So the connection then to Massimo and Floriana, Alicia and their group, they will be running on Tuesday, but they'll be covering quite the same materials as the students in, say, one of the other institutions, just on a different day. So if we work within a week-to-week basis, that's fine. I think if everybody who's involved in, say, the primary line is doing something similar during the same week, it doesn't matter whether it's on the Monday or the Tuesday or the Wednesday. The only exception is the live-to-air session, where we're going to try and have a once-off. Now, if it turns out that the Monday session doesn't suit most participants, then in UCD we are open to moving that. But we have to have some fixed point to start with. If necessary, we can change the UCD slot if it means doing so to get a better level of uptake from the partners across the network. And that's something we can work out as we go. When we see how many interested parties we actually have, we'll have a better sense of how we might organize the live-to-air in such a way that it's meaningful and valuable for all of the participants.
Thank you, Connor. Now, I know we've circulated the updated handbooks for people to review and think how will they implement this within their university. I don't know at the moment whether anyone has any comments. Well, we've got Connor here. Whether there's any question you want to address directly with Connor. We're always available by email, and we'll circulate the recording and the slides and our email addresses. But if anyone has any question directly for Connor now, please raise your hand or unmute your mic, and any final questions before we go on to the last couple of slides. We'll keep our eyes on the chat line.
Yeah, I see Vesna's typing there, but it seems to have disappeared. There it is. It's come in now. It'd be very useful to have preferred dates from possible dates. Yes, absolutely. And Vesna, to be honest, that's one of the key learnings that has come out of the whole thing. If you can plan 2 years in advance, that's the time to be planning for university involvement. Unfortunately, we have much tighter time frames. So yes, if we stay with the participant. Yeah, sorry. Carry on.
Yeah, I didn't want to interrupt by coming in on the audio, but yes, I appreciate that it will sometimes be last minute. We would like to be as flexible as possible. So for us, advanced note could even be 1 week. That's how we work. So yeah, we will just work out the best way of making that contact, so that we'll see what is possible.
Yeah, and can I, while Vesna's there, colleagues who have not worked with us on the previous module might not know that Vesna and Christoph ran a very, very useful short 10-minute webinar to begin the activities in relation to using video the last time out. Now, we had some technical issues to do with password protections and stuff like that, but I'm confident they have now been sorted, and I'm looking forward to seeing how that particular element of the materials will work second time around. And equally, Richard, who was on the who was there earlier, I think is in the background, the Microsoft support in relation to using Skype. Again, a mini webinar started the activity, and then we just continued on our own, if you like. And that model works reasonably well, certainly in a pilot stage. Trying to sustain it beyond pilot is part of the challenge we're facing in this particular trial run. Dorothy.
Okay, that's fine. So I think what we'll do is, Connor will just run through the last couple of slides explaining where we go now, and then we'll take another final question, but we're just close this particular briefing after that. So we have the different modules. I've made an error on this slide because I hadn't made an error. The MOOC briefing is going to be on the 6th of February, and but tomorrow we have the 18th of January. We'll have the similar briefing, but for the module B. So there's the 3 different modules which have got slightly different start dates. And so we're having different briefings for them because different universities are interested in different aspects of them. The MOOC itself starts from the 25th of February for the 6 weeks, and we have a briefing for universities planned for the 6th of February then, which gives the opportunity to ask questions. And then I'd just like to share with everyone there, while we're a smaller number here today, we're dealing at the moment with all these different universities. The first grey line is all our partner universities, and we heard today from Santarem that they're doing Module B, but they're also doing the MOOC. And it shows how University College of Dublin is doing the full set. University of Agder is integrating parts, so as Connor was mentioning, the frames and integrating parts into their teaching in the MOOC. University of Newcastle has used the frame and is already teaching with that throughout and has integrated its own resources into that. And then Perugia is the full set in primary, and Santarem is Module B, going to use elements of Module A we heard this morning, plus also the MOOC. And then we have our other universities who will be sharing this information with, who are interested and still to confirm their implementation. And then we have the universities that are interested in the MOOC and are going to actually implement the MOOC as part within their existing curriculum and give an assessment mark of it as well within e-portfolios. And finally at the bottom we have other universities we're dealing with who are observing at the moment, disseminating, hoping to come in later, and we're dealing with all the networks as well. So that just gives you an extension of all the universities that we're dealing with at the moment, and a very welcome to see Torben from Göttingen University today. It goes out, many can't. Our problem throughout this project is how to schedule times that suit all across all the different teaching commitments, so the information will be shared with everyone. And within European SchoolNet over the next week or two we'll be contacting everyone to confirm what are their implementation plans as far as they can see. Okay, so that brings us, this shows us all the partners that we have and our associate partners. That brings us to the end as far of the briefing. Just take any final questions while you're thinking of them. You could put them in the chat. I'd just like to thank Connor again. Connor, thank you very much for another excellent briefing. It's really helpful, I think, for people to be able to hear how you're teaching this. And thank you, colleagues, for joining us today at this briefing. And we will share this, and we have a briefing on Module C, as I say, tomorrow. So thank you very much, Connor, again, and thank you, colleagues.
Sorry, Dorothy. It's Module B briefing tomorrow. Module C briefing is just before Module C starts. Okay.
I've had too many meetings today.
Very small error, but we don't want people to turn up in their hundreds and be disappointed.
Module B tomorrow. Module B tomorrow. Thank you.